We are in session again. Mr. Durst is present, Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. Lewin and his colleagues are present as well. The witness Doug Oliver has resumed the witness stand. I'll remind you that you are under oath. Mr. Lewin, you may continue with your examination of the witness.
Thank you. Mr. Oliver, you have previously testified that you had a chance to review the transcripts of your calls to Mr. Durst, correct?
With Mr. Durst.
With Mr. Durst, correct?
Yes, those calls, yes.
And you agree you spoke to him on October 16, 2017, May 3rd, 2018, March 20th, 2019, and had visits with him on April 22nd, 2017, and October 26, 2019. Does that sound about right?
I only had one visit with him.
Do you recall having a visit with him a couple of days before you had the conversation, the interview with myself and detectives? The interview was April 30th and the visit, October 30th and the visit October 26, 2019?
I think I only visited him once, didn't I?
Well, so it's your position you did not visit him on April 22nd, 2017?
Objective position.
Well, oral.
I visited him at the downtown.
No, I'm not asking where. Let's go this way. You had a visit with him a couple of days before you came to court in 2019 and 4 days before you did the interview with myself and investigators, correct?
I don't think I had a visit with him.
All right.
I don't recall having a visit.
Do you recall you were given a transcript that you said you have reviewed of your interview on October 30th, 2019, correct? You've looked at that.
Is that the call we had? Is that
Yes,
the transcript?
correct.
Okay.
Do you recall, Mr. Oliver, that in fact, during that trip, you met with Mr. Durst and came into court where Judge Wyndham ordered you to come back? Do you recall that?
I did not meet with him. I saw him in court.
Okay, so it's your position you did not meet with him on October 26, 2019?
I don't believe that I met with him.
Okay, I'll return to that a little bit later. Do you recall telling Mr. Durst during your March 20th, 2019 call, but Bob, I'd love to go over with you, but you know that I shouldn't be talking on the phone about your case. I don't want to do something to hurt you. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
So what did you mean about hurting Mr. Durst?
I really wanted the calls to be enjoyable for him and to try and take his mind off his problems. And I just thought it'd be better to restrict everything to just positive thoughts.
Isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that what you meant by that is that you didn't want to say anything or have Mr. Durst say anything to you that could result in doing something to negatively impact his case? That's what you meant by hurting, correct?
Overall.
Thank you. I apologize. Could you answer the question again, please?
Isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that by using the word hurting, that what you meant was you didn't want Mr. Durst to say anything to you that could potentially negatively impact his case?
I think I wanted him to have a positive conversation with me and not bring up anything that would make him feel bad. I think when I meant hurt, I meant making him feel bad. And I thought it was best for me to try and steer him away from any problems and just talk about nice things.
So you're saying that what you meant by hurt had nothing to do with hurting his case?
No, I don't think that my conversation had any impact on the case.
I'd like to play clip number D0030 from October 30th, 2019, page 58, lines 7 through 19.
Relevance.
Relevance overruled.
Your Honor, can we mark that as 112?
Okay, 112.
I apologize, Your Honor, there's an issue with the sound right now.
About the case. Well, let me ask you something. How come you?
I'm going to play it again, I apologize.
0030.
I'm sorry to talk about anything because you see, when I don't, the two times I've seen him or when he calls me on the phone, if he ever, I will not talk to him about the case. Well, let me ask you something. How come you won't talk to Bob about the case when he calls you on the phone when he wants to talk to you about the case? Because I don't think it, because first of all, it's my understanding that they're recorded, and it was my understanding that the worst thing you do is have the defendant talk about the case. Well, I mean, that's true.
Overruled.
It impeaches on the two areas.
Overruled.
Oh, I didn't hear the court, Your Honor.
That's
Mr.
all
Oliver.
right. You gotta ring a bell when it's.
Would you go ahead and ring that bell now?
Your Honor, if possible, and I think it's because of the.
I'm gonna use the microphone so everyone can hear me. Overrule the objection
Thank you, Your Honor.
or sustain it, so careful.
The ones I don't hear are just the sustained, Your Honor. I hear the overrules. Mr. Oliver, in that clip, you mentioned having seen Bob 2 times, correct?
Yes.
Does that refresh your memory that you saw him 2 times?
I believe I visited him at his jail once, and then the next time I saw him was in this court, well, the other courtroom, but I didn't have a visit with him.
Mr. Oliver, what was just played to you was from the October 30th, 2019 interview. You also were very clear that you said, quote, "It's my understanding they're recorded, and it was my understanding the worst thing you can do is have a defendant talk about the case." And you said, "So I don't want to hurt him." So, Mr. Oliver, isn't it true that in saying that, what you meant was you did not want Bob to say anything on a recorded line that might negatively impact his case, correct?
And that's a compound question.
Overruled.
That means you can answer the question.
Can you answer again? I'm sorry. I have trouble concentrating when they speak among themselves. I lose my train of thought.
So, Mr. Oliver, again, on this call, you said that you understood that it was recorded, that it was your understanding that the worst thing you could do is the worst thing that could happen is for a defendant to talk about a case, and you said, "So I don't want to hurt him." Isn't it correct, Mr. Oliver, that by saying that you meant that you did not want Bob Durst to say anything that could negatively impact his case?
No.
So what did you mean by that comment that you just heard?
I wanted to keep the conversation light.
Did you say that in the interview?
Which interview?
The clip that we just played for you, Mr. Oliver.
No, I didn't say that in the clip.
So you were asked why you took the approach that you took, why you told Bob Durst not to say anything, and your response was because you didn't want him to say something to hurt his case. You are now saying in court that no. What I actually meant was I just wanted to keep it light and happy. Which is correct?
I think I'd like to keep it light and happy.
But is that what you said when you were interviewed on October 30, 2019?
No, I said what I said.
All right, clip D0031, October 30, 2019, page 62, line 24 to page 62, line 11.
And Your Honor, Mark, this is 113.
Yes?
Just listen to me. You're on these tapes, basically. Bob wants to talk about the case, and you're telling him don't talk about it. So I just want to get from you, and there's nothing wrong with saying it. There's nothing wrong with you saying, hey, listen, Bob is my friend, and I don't want him to say anything that's going to incriminate himself. That's a true statement, correct?
I just don't want to discuss the case because I don't think we should discuss it. I think that for me and him, I have no knowledge of the case. I don't want to discuss it.
No, but listen, Doug, listen to me again.
I understand what you're going to say.
Doug, very simple. You want me to tell you? I want you to admit that when you're talking to Bob, your concern is not about trying to figure out what happened, not about trying to help law enforcement, not about trying to get justice for Susan and Kathy. You're concerned that you don't want your friend incriminating himself. And I'm not making a judgment on that. That's just true. Yes or no?
I'm making a judgment, okay?
Wait, Doug, is that true or not? Is that true or not?
I can't answer that.
Well, wait, you can't answer or don't want to?
Excuse me, can we stop this for a second?
Well, can't means you physically can't, so.
Right, so that means I don't want to answer that question because
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where you can.
Objection? State the ground.
Relevant.
I think it's relevant. Try again.
Your Honor, at this point, would it be a timely objection? I mean, seriously.
Well, we're seeing what he's wanting to play.
Right, I didn't
So we
know
understand.
what was gonna be played.
It's under 1235, Your Honor. It's a prior inconsistent statement on the very issues I've been cross-examining the man about.
Your Honor, there's a constitutional issue raised by this.
I don't think so. Well, I think it's 352 though.
Yes.
352.
Yeah, there you go. I think it's more prejudicial than probative. There's a number of reasons why that he need not speak to Mr. Durst about anything, but not talk about the case. So
All right.
I'm not. You've touched on it. I don't think it implicates the Sixth Amendment. I don't think there's any or Fifth Amendment, but I think that's enough.
Did Mr. Durst ask you during one of your phone conversations, did he ask you to be a character witness for him?
I don't recall. I think he asked me. I think he asked me to testify.
Did he explain to you what he wanted you to testify about? And that's a yes or a no question.
I don't recall.
When was your last comment with Bob Durst?
Excuse me?
Your last contact with Bob Durst? When was it?
You mean physically in front of each other?
Any contact, phone, in person, smoke signals, any contact?
Today.
Today. Well, that's okay. Other than in the courtroom, when is your last contact with Mr. Durst?
I don't recall the date. I mean,
Is there anybody that you have used, Mr. Oliver, to communicate with Mr. Durst indirectly, either his lawyers or mutual friends, etc.?
the only way I communicated with him the last several years is he would call me.
All right. So you haven't had discussions with other individuals who you have then had get messages to Mr. Durst or vice versa?
His wife.
Okay. And when's the last time you talked to his wife about Mr. Durst?
Well, if you count just asking how he is, when I see her in Southampton,
No,
I always inquire.
No, I'm not asking. I'm merely asking, not about what, if you've said, hey, how's Bob doing? Have you had any substantive conversations with Mr. Durst's wife regarding your participation in this case?
No.
When was your last contact with Mr. Durst's lawyers?
I think the last contact was when I was out here, when I was in the courtroom, when I met you.
And overall, how many times do you think you've spoken to Mr. Durst's lawyers?
I don't recall. I mean, it's been so many years.
I think you testified last time that you've had approximately 5 hours worth of conversations with them. Do you recall that?
No, I don't recall saying 5 hours, because I think it was probably maybe 5 times.
And the subject of your conversation with Mr. Durst's lawyers, have those involved your testimony?
Well, they told me they weren't going to call me. They didn't think that I had anything to add.
And when did they tell you this?
Years ago.
Did they tell you at all prior to coming out this trip, and by this trip I mean either this week or last week, that they were going to call you as their own witness?
No, you told my attorney they were.
And have they told you similar information?
No, they haven't told me directly, no.
Have they told you anything through your attorney?
I don't know how to answer that, sir. Okay?
Well, let me put it simply.
I don't know what they told my attorney.
Are you aware of your attorney having conversations with Mr. Durst's attorneys?
Yes.
Okay. Have those conversations continued up until the time of your testimony today?
Yes.
When is the last time you were aware of that your attorney had a conversation with Mr. Durst's attorneys?
I think last night.
And do you know what the subject of those conversations was?
No.
And it's your position that you were not told at all that Mr. Durst's attorneys intended to call you as their witness. Is that
You
correct?
told me that.
No, other than me. You didn't hear that from your lawyer, and you didn't hear that from...
No, yeah, sure, of course. She said that the district attorney is correct. You're going to be called.
Okay, so my question is, have you been made aware of conversations, either you directly or with your attorney and Mr. Durst's attorneys, regarding you being called as a witness?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Yes or no would be helpful.
I know that's what you'd like, but that's not the answer.
Is there another answer other than yes or no?
This is argumentative, Marty. I
Overall-
think it also implicates conversations with his lawyer.
It does not. It's not for proof.
Okay, so, let me look at this question again. Consider Mr. DeGuerin's objection. As a witness. Now, overruled. You probably have to ask again.
Is that correct? Do I need to ask it again? Or do you remember the question?
Is that a question?
Do you remember my question, Mr. Oliver?
I'd like you to repeat if you don't mind, please.
Sure. Are you aware of your attorney discussing with the defense team whether or not you were going to be called as a witness?
Your Honor, may I be heard?
No.
This does involve the attorney-client conversations. I'm not his attorney. She is, and, you know, to ask what conversations they've had,
Your Honor,
that's the very basis of attorney-client privilege.
I'm allowed to
Not
inquire.
exactly, but please be seated. Mr. Lewin?
I'm allowed to inquire as to what Mr. Oliver is aware of, what he has been told, the contacts he has had with Mr. DeGuerin, either directly or through his attorney, because it absolutely goes to his bias, especially when he has said that he is here as a neutral, unbiased witness.
Well, regardless of him saying that, I'll overrule that objection, but I'll listen carefully to your questions. If there is something that implicates attorney-client privilege, in that instance, I'll keep my ear out for you, counsel. State your name for the record, because you're not on our record.
Right now.
Please state your name for our record.
Stephanie Yadakura.
We'll get your card representing Mr. Oliver. All right, go ahead.
Can the question be read back, Your Honor? I want to make sure it's read back exactly as asked, so we don't have.
Yes?
Thank you.
Are you aware of your attorney discussing with the defense team whether or not you were going to be called as a witness sometime?
I don't know how to answer that.
Your Honor, could the witness be instructed? It's a yes or no question.
Answer if you're aware, are you aware of that or not?
I'm aware they had some discussions.
So that would be a yes, correct?
I don't know how to answer that, sir.
I'll go to the next question. Mr. Oliver, are you aware that Nick Chavin testified in this case previously?
You told me he did.
Have you and Mr. Durst ever discussed that testimony?
In one of the calls, he mentioned it.
And what was your response, Mr. Oliver, to hearing that Mr. Chavin had testified that Mr. Durst had confessed to him? What was your response?
I was disappointed in Nick.
And in fact, isn't it true that what you said was that, quote, that really upset me? You said, I read that. I mean, he seems to be, it was such a terrible thing to do. He just should have said nothing. And then you laughed. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what it was in the transcript.
Let's play.
He says yes, that's what it is in the transcript.
That's not saying he admitted it. That's simply saying it's in the transcript. So, Your Honor, I'm going to under
No,
12.
he said yes and also acknowledged that it's in the, I took it to mean,
Oh.
yes, that's what he did say, and that's what did happen, and it's in the transcript.
Is
So
that what-
relieves you of the need to play a recording for the jury to something he's acknowledged is true.
Let me be clear. Is that, in fact, not just what the transcript said, but what you, in fact, said?
That's repetitious.
What?
The court's rule.
No.
Overruled. The transcript is, you know, it's a bit cumulative, but the transcript is calling for you to say the transcript is correct, and the transcript is correct, is basically the meaning.
No, I'm really asking, Mr. Oliver, did you, in fact, forget about the transcript said, did you say that?
In the conversation, yes.
And can you explain why did you say that?
No, I can't.
Isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that what you were saying was that a loyal friend like Nick Chavin should have just kept his mouth closed and pretend that he didn't know anything?
No, I just didn't want to talk about it with Bob.
Mr. Oliver, you specifically said it was a terrible thing to do. He should have just said nothing.
Cumulative.
I was really surprised that he did that.
Cumulative, 352, hearsay. It implicates hearsay.
Not hearsay.
False.
I'll give him, it's not hearsay. I'll give him leeway on this. This is not for the truth of the statement. This is for what it reveals about the speaker. So it's not the truth of the statement. You may ask, but don't overdo it. It's, you can ask it. That question is slightly different. I'll allow it.
Mr. Oliver, please listen to my question. You said as follows. It was just a terrible thing to do. He should have just said nothing. Then you laughed. I just don't understand. I was really surprised he did that, So I'm asking you, why did you say that?
I don't know why I said that.
Would you agree, Mr. Oliver, that in listening to it, it certainly sounds as if you are saying that Nick Chavin should have been a good friend and kept his mouth shut?
That's argumentative.
Overruled.
I disagree with you.
Okay, when you say you disagree, what do you disagree about?
I don't recall why I said it. Okay?
Does that appear to be a pretty exact statement where you are criticizing Nick Chavin for having come forward and reporting Mr. Durst's confession to authorities?
Wait a minute, that implicates hearsay.
Overruled.
I don't understand the question. Can you repeat that again?
Okay, Mr. Oliver. Have that read back, Your Honor.
Can you read it back loud, please?
Does that appear to be a pretty exact statement where you are criticizing Nick Chavin for having come forward and having reporting Mr. Durst's confession to authorities?
No.
Can you explain what it is you took Nick Chavin to have done?
I don't think he was truthful.
Well, did you say it wasn't truthful?
No?
You said it was just a terrible thing to do and that he should have said nothing. What did you mean by that?
I guess at the time I probably meant, I don't know what I meant. I really don't understand what I meant.
Mr. Oliver, isn't it true that what you meant was that Nick Chavin should have been a good friend and kept his mouth shut and not told the police what Bob Durst told him?
And that's repetition.
Overruled.
Words in
Overruled.
his mouth,
Overruled.
misleading and
Overruled.
suggestive of the answer.
Yes, he can do that. This is a hostile witness. That's what I permitted him to do. Overruled.
Sorry.
Wait, seriously?
No,
Sure.
I'm sorry. Seriously, what?
He's looking at me with the repeat the question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. You don't mind.
I'm very nervous up here.
I'll repeat it again.
Okay, you're, as the judge said, you're not respecting me, and I'm just trying to respect
Okay.
you, sir.
Okay,
So
sir,
I'd like to have the courtesy, please.
Let me repeat it. Mr. Oliver, isn't it true that what you meant by that statement of it was a terrible thing to do, he just should have said nothing, is that you were upset that Nick Chavin had told the authorities that your mutual friend Bob Durst had confessed to him?
That's two questions, isn't it?
No, it's one question. I'm glad you're listening.
I don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you.
Your Honor, could the witness be instructed? That's a yes or a no question.
why don't you repeat it? Repeat your question slowly.
Okay, Mr. Oliver. You acknowledge that you said on the recording, it was a terrible thing to do, he just should have said nothing, correct?
That I said it? Yes, I said it.
So my question to you is, in saying that, isn't what you meant, Mr. Oliver, that you were upset that Nick Chavin had betrayed his friend Bob Durst and told the police of Bob Durst's confession?
I don't remember why I said that.
So now that you've heard it, you've acknowledged that you've said it, can you explain what the meaning could be other than what I have just ascribed to it?
Well, I know it's not what you described, but the answer is no.
Do you agree, Mr. Oliver, that in listening to the plain language of the statement, that the description that I have given would be consistent with the words that you used?
That's argumentative. And 352.
Overruled. The witness doesn't deny the statement. The witness cannot explain his statement. So I think, I don't know what else you want to do. Mr.
Yeah, I want to
And
answer.
Mr. Lewin offering the explanation is argument.
It is not.
No, it's not, because, so what he's doing is suggesting, he's making a suggestion to which this witness can agree or not agree, and that is the essence of cross-examination, to make an assertion and call for assent or denial. You've done that, however.
He
Mr.
didn't
Lewin.
answer this last question. The court overruled it, but he didn't answer it. I assume I'll have to repeat it again, Mr. Oliver?
Always repeat the question when there's been an objection.
Sure.
These aren't questions you mind repeating, so repeat it again.
Sure. Mr. Oliver, do you agree, having listened to the statement, it was just a terrible thing to do, he just should have said nothing, that the reasonable meaning of your words would be that you were criticizing Nick Chavin for having conveyed Mr. Durst's confession to authorities?
No.
So my question is, can you explain another meaning that you could have meant by those words?
I cannot explain it.
You were asked about this conversation with Mr. Durst during the October 30, 2019 interview, is that correct?
Who asked?
During the October 30, 2019 interview, I asked you about that conversation that you had with Mr. Durst, the October 16, 2017 conversation that I've just discussed, where you said it was just a terrible thing to do, he should just have said nothing. Do you recall being asked about that and discussing it during your October 30, 2019 interview?
Yeah, I recall it. Yes.
Have you ever asked Mr. Durst if he killed Kathy Durst?
No.
Have you ever asked him if he killed Susan Berman?
No.
Have you ever asked Mr. Durst if Nick Chavin's testimony, where Mr. Durst confessed to killing Susan Berman, was true?
That implicates hearsay. We
What?
object to it.
Overruled.
It states what the hearsay is.
Yes, that's right. It's not for the truth.
352.
Overruled. Overruled. He can confront him with this.
Have you ever asked Mr. Durst if Nick Chavin's testimony, where Nick Chavin said that Bob Durst had confessed to him that he had killed Susan Berman, have you ever asked Mr. Durst if that testimony is true?
No.
So you've had a conversation with Mr. Durst where you tell him that you think Nick betrayed him, correct? Correct?
Is that the end of the sentence? I mean,
Yes, that's the end of that. I'm going to take it one at a time.
okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Meaning,
I'd like you to repeat.
okay. One moment, Mr. Oliver.
No problem.
So you have testified that you had a conversation with Mr. Durst where you discussed Nick Chavin's testimony, correct?
Yes.
And during that conversation, you made clear in the words that you used, which you've admitted you said, that you thought it was a terrible thing Nick had done to Bob, and that he should have said nothing, correct?
I said that.
And so my question is in having that conversation with Mr. Durst, did you ever ask Mr. Durst, hey Bob, is what Nick testified to true? Did you ever ask that?
No.
You didn't want to know the answer, did you?
That's not true. I just didn't ask him.
Listen to my question. You did not want to know the answer, did you?
I don't know how to answer that question. Other than that, I didn't ask.
So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Oliver, you've indicated and testified that you were having a conversation with Mr. Durst about this testimony by Mr. Chavin. And you've also said that you did not ask Mr. Durst whether that testimony was true or false. So my question is, you did not want to know that answer, did you?
Repetitious.
It's asked and answered.
Your Honor, what was the answer?
Yes, he said, no.
I don't think he answered it.
He stated you did not ask him true or false. He did not want to answer that. Let's see. That's true, he did not actually answer the question. Didn't answer that question. All right.
Can you answer that question, Mr. Oliver?
No.
You need me to repeat it?
No, I can't answer the question.
No, okay, I'm gonna repeat
No,
it.
you repeated it and he said, I cannot answer the question, he says.
It's a yes or a no question. When you say
No,
you can't answer it, what does that mean?
I don't know the answer to the question.
So I want you to think.
Things I haven't thought, I didn't, what, I don't know what you want.
Let me ask, Mr. Oliver, listen to my question. Isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that you deliberately have not asked Bob Durst whether or not Nick Chavin's statement is true because you are afraid of the answer?
Again,
Overruled.
ask and answer.
Overruled. No, that's not answered.
No.
Can you explain then why it is during that conversation you never asked him if it was true or false what Nick had said?
No.
You were asked about this issue during your October 30th, 2019 interview, is that correct?
I don't recall, but if you say it was.
Clip D0040, October 30th, 2019, page 92, line 18 to page 93, line 1.
Your Honor, maybe we mark this as 114?
Just a moment. Are you refreshing his recollection? or-
No, I'm impeaching him under 1235. I believe he's being deliberately
Okay.
evasive under Green.
All right, go ahead. 114.
So you did not know, well, you said you were aware of testimony, you were aware that Nick Chavin had said that Bob confessed to him Susan's murder, right? You were aware of that. Well, you just told me. Bro, but and again, that's the first time you ever heard anything about Nick. I don't recall when I first heard it, okay, but it probably went in and out, you know. Wait. It went in and out that your friend confessed to murder? Have you had other friends? He didn't confess to murder. We don't know if he confessed to murder.
So, Mr. Oliver, when is it that you first became aware that Nick Chavin had provided damaging testimony with respect to Mr. Durst?
That implicates hearsay.
Overruled.
The best of my knowledge, I can't recall.
Well, you agree it would have to have been before the clip I played for you of the October 16, 2017 call where you were commenting that you couldn't believe what Nick had done, correct? You had to have known about it then, right?
Yes.
So my question is that during the last clip I just played for you, you were basically saying, you said that in essence, you just heard about it during the interview that we were having October 2019. Is that true or false?
I guess that's true.
Meaning, Mr. Oliver, you would agree that in saying you just heard about it when I told you during the 2019 interview, that was not a correct statement because you knew about it 2 years earlier when you were discussing with Mr. Durst, correct?
That's such a confusing question, sir. I don't know how to answer it.
I'm gonna give it one more attempt.
Why don't you make it into 3 questions?
I will.
Thank you.
Mr. Oliver, in 2017, you made the statement that I've now discussed with you, where you said that in essence, it was a terrible thing for Nick to do and that he just should have kept his mouth closed, should have said nothing. You agree that's what you said, correct?
Yes.
That was said in 2017. You reviewed the transcript, correct?
Yes.
So in 2019, when you were interviewed in October, your response was, do you agree that you responded that you just heard about Nick Chavin's testimony from me during the interview, correct?
Yes, that's what I said to you.
You agree, Mr. Oliver, both those things cannot be true. Do you agree?
No, because that's what I thought at the time.
Okay, so you're saying you were not intentionally lying on October 30th, you were mistaken, and you now realize you were mistaken when you said that. Is that your testimony?
I was not lying, sir.
But you do agree that what you said was not true, was inaccurate.
No, I don't agree it was not true.
Was it
It's a
inaccurate?
double negative. What?
Was it inaccurate, Mr. Oliver?
I don't know how to answer that question. I really don't.
Your response, Mr. Oliver, in 2019 during the interview, when I said you were aware of Nick Chavin's testimony, you responded, quote, "Well, you just told me." I just played that for you. You heard that, correct?
I believe you just told me that.
No, I played it for you, so you heard it,
Yeah, I
correct?
heard it, yes.
And in fact, it was not that you just found out about it by me telling you. You knew about it 2 years earlier when you had the conversation with Mr. Durst, correct?
Is that a double question? Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Okay. You said during the October 30th, 2019 interview, when I asked you about Nick Chavin's testimony regarding Bob Durst's confession, your response was, I asked you, are you aware of that? And you said, well, you just told me. You recall testifying, you recall saying that during the interview, correct?
Yes.
I just played it for you and you heard it, correct?
I said yes, sir.
So my question is how could it be true that you just became aware of it when I told you about it in 2019, when 2 years earlier you're talking about that very subject with Mr. Durst and saying that you were upset that Nick Chavin had betrayed him?
Ask and answered in compound.
Overruled.
I don't know how to answer that. It seems like I've answered it several times.
Your Honor, can the court instruct the witness to answer the question?
Answer the question, Mr. Oliver.
The question again, please.
Can it be read back, please? It's going to be more objections.
So my question is, how could it be true that you just became aware of it when I told you about it in 2019, when 2 years earlier you're talking about that very subject with me, with Mr. Durst, and saying that you were upset that Nick Chavin had betrayed him?
I don't know how to answer that. Okay.
Can you try yes or no, Mr. Oliver?
That's not something.
It doesn't call for a yes or no, it calls for how could it be true?
How can it be true, Mr. Oliver?
I don't know.
So you agree that you cannot come up with an explanation as to why you would have said in 2019, I just found out about this information from you, meaning myself, when 2 years earlier you were discussing that very information with Mr. Durst, correct?
Ask and answer.
Overruled.
Thank you.
Mr. Oliver, in reviewing the transcript of the October 16, 2017 call with Mr. Durst, that wasn't the only time that you talked about your disappointment with Mr. Chavin, was it?
I don't recall, but if you say it did, I guess I did.
Jail clip D0011, 10/16/17, page 13, lines 2 through 15.
Improper impeachment.
I don't know what's going to be read, so I don't know if it's improper. Are you going to prove the contrary?
Yes.
That's his statement?
Yes.
He didn't make a statement to prove the contrary of. He said he didn't know.
I'm asking the court to find under People versus Green that
Yeah,
the witness is being
it's
deliberately evasive.
when there's a evasion, then it's appropriate. Overruled.
001?
011, D0111.
And this is People's 115?
Yes, Your Honor.
And talking about the trial, the thing that really upset me is Nick. I just can't believe that guy. Say that again. Now, the thing that really upset me about this, the little I know about what's going on, is Nick. I just can't believe Nick. You know? Just can't believe what? I just can't believe he did what he did, that's all. Who did what? Who did? Nick. Remember Nick Chavin? Oh, yes. That really upset me, Bob. It upset me for you.
We lost the next two lines are, Mr. Durst says, yeah, well, it upset me too, and then you say, you know, as a friend. You've had a chance to review that previously, correct, Mr. Oliver?
I just read it.
And isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that what you meant by this statement is that you were voicing your disapproval with Nick Chavin for having communicated Bob's confession to investigators?
Yes.
And in fact, Mr. Oliver, you never said during that exchange, you didn't say to Mr. Durst, Bob, wait, did you actually say that to Nick? You didn't ask him that, did you?
I'm sorry, I was reading this while you were speaking.
Sure. Mr. Oliver, you have expressed on two different occasions during that phone call that you were upset that Bob Durst had been betrayed by his friend Nick Chavin, correct?
I was upset for Bob.
And Mr. Oliver, but you never asked Bob Durst, hey Bob, is what Nick said untrue, did you?
No, I did not ask him.
And in fact, Mr. Oliver, because for you, what you cared about, what was important to you, was not whether or not what Mr. Chavin had said was true. It was the idea that he had betrayed his friend, correct?
No.
Well, what was it that you meant by those two comments that I've now played for you?
I just was thinking it would be upsetting to Bob, that's all. I just didn't want to talk about things that would be upsetting to him.
Do you know what the cadaver note is, Mr. Oliver?
You've told me about that.
Do you know what it is, yes or no?
Yes.
And you would agree that Mr. Durst has always denied to you that he wrote the cadaver note, correct?
He never mentioned it to me.
Did he ever tell you that he found Susan's body and that he panicked?
I don't recall him telling me that.
Well, when you say you don't recall it, is that something that if he had told you, you think you would recall?
Yeah, I think if he had told me, I'd recall it.
So you would agree that to the best of your memory, Mr. Durst never has told you that, you know what, I found Susan's body, correct?
We never discussed it.
And you never discussed it again, Mr. Oliver, because you didn't want to ask, did you?
No.
Meaning correct. Yes, correct or incorrect?
Correct or incorrect what?
Correct or incorrect that you
Vegas.
did not want to
I
know?
hear you. Let's see.
I'll just re-ask it, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Do you understand my question, Mr. Oliver?
No.
Correct or incorrect that you did not ask because you did not want to know the answer?
I can't answer that question. It's not a question.
It is in fact a question. Can you explain why you can't answer it?
I don't know the answer.
Well, that question calls for a yes or a no.
I don't believe so.
Let me state the question again. Mr. Oliver, isn't it true that the reason you did not ask Bob Durst about having killed Susan Berman, or about writing the cadaver note, or about having found the body, was because you did not want to know the answer?
Compound.
Overruled. I'll allow it.
I can't answer that question.
Okay, it is compound. I allowed it
All
for
right.
efficiency's sake,
All
but it's actually probably more efficient to ask 3 questions
All right.
than 1.
Mr. Oliver, isn't it true that you didn't ask Bob Durst whether or not he had written the cadaver note because you didn't want to know?
I did not ask him.
Why didn't you ask him?
I don't recall why I didn't ask him.
as you sit here today, would you agree that you've been aware for many years that Mr. Durst was a suspect in Susan Berman's murder?
I don't recall how long I've known he's been a suspect.
I didn't ask you the date. You've known that for many years, though, correct?
I don't recall how long I've known.
Have you had numerous conversations with Mr. Durst after the period of time where you knew that he was a suspect?
I've only spoken to him since April of 17 till now, I guess.
And at that time, you were aware that he was not only a suspect in Susan Berman's murder, he was charged with it, correct?
I'm not aware when he was charged.
Your Honor, I'd like the court to take judicial notice that Mr. Durst was charged with this murder case in March of 2015.
Yes, the court record reflects the filing of the complaint at that time.
Mr. Oliver, the
Yes.
court has just taken judicial notice of the fact that Mr. Durst was charged in March of 2015. Your conversations took place after that date. Is it your position that you did not know that Mr. Durst had been charged with Susan Berman's murder?
No,
When did you find out?
I don't recall.
Did you know when you were talking to him on the phone and he was in jail?
Is that the end of the question?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, I knew he was charged.
Okay, so that means that when you were having these conversations in 2017, 2018, and 2019, you knew that he had been charged with Susan Berman's murder, correct?
Yes,
You also were well aware of Mr. Chavin's testimony from at least 2018 when you discussed it on the phone with Mr. Durst, correct?
I don't recall, but I don't know what the answer is. Okay.
Well, you've already testified, Mr. Oliver, that if you were discussing it in 2018 with Mr. Durst, you've conceded you had to have been aware of it, correct?
Okay, I was aware of it, yes.
So my question is, isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that the reason you've never asked Bob Durst about whether or not he killed Susan during that time when you knew about it is because you didn't want to know the answer?
No,
Was it because you didn't think? Let me ask you, why didn't you ask?
I don't know why I didn't ask.
All right, would that be the same reason why you didn't ask whether or not he had written the cadaver note?
Yeah, I can't remember why I didn't ask.
And would that be the same reason as to why you didn't ask him whether or not he had found Susan's body?
Yes, I didn't ask. That's a fact. I did not ask.
And, by the way, have you ever asked him if he killed Kathy?
No, I never asked him.
And would you agree that the reason you have not asked him whether he killed Kathy is because, again, you are afraid to hear the answer?
No,
Isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that you have said that you cannot imagine your friend Bob Durst having committed an act of violence against his wife?
I've said that.
And isn't it true that you are now aware, Mr. Oliver, that Mr. Durst has admitted to committing numerous acts of violence against his wife?
No, I'm not aware that he admitted that. I haven't read that anyplace.
Okay? So as you sit here today, you have no knowledge that Mr. Durst has admitted that he committed numerous acts of violence against his wife. It's new information today that you're finding out.
I'm having trouble remembering when I heard that. I mean, I've in the transcripts, not transcripts, in the news reporting, I've heard all kinds of things.
So, Mr. Oliver, do you agree that you have known, certainly since Mr. Durst was charged in this case, that it is alleged that, strike that he has admitted during interviews that he was violent with his wife?
I don't recall him ever saying that to me.
Isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that you have previously said that you can't imagine your friend Bob Durst killing Susan Berman? You just can't imagine it.
Did I say that?
I'm asking you, does that reflect your current feelings? As you sit here, you can't imagine your friend Bob Durst killing Susan Berman.
No, I don't want to think about him killing anyone.
And for the same reason, you would agree, Mr. Oliver, you don't even want to think about your friend Bob Durst dismembering somebody. That's another thing you cannot even imagine, correct?
It's very hard to imagine, yes.
But, Mr. Oliver, you are aware now that Mr. Durst has admitted to that dismemberment, correct?
You mean he admitted that? Okay. I guess he admitted it. I don't know. I thought that trial he got acquitted, though.
Mr. Oliver, are you telling this jury that you were not aware that Mr. Durst had admitted to dismembering Morris Black?
I'm aware that he dismembered someone.
That someone being Morris Black, correct?
Yes.
And, Mr. Oliver, isn't it true that you have previously said that you can't imagine the Bob Durst you know dismembering somebody?
That's ask and answer.
It has not been asked and answered.
Overruled.
Isn't that true, Mr. Oliver? You can't imagine the Bob Durst you know dismembering somebody.
I don't like to think about that.
And, Mr. Oliver, the reason you don't want to think about that is you would agree it is difficult for you to concede in your mind to accept that someone you care about is potentially involved in the killing of 3 people.
I just don't. I don't know what the facts are. I don't know if it's factual.
Well, you know what the facts are about the dismemberment. You've said you're aware Mr. Durst has admitted it,
You
correct?
just told me that, yes.
No, but you said you were well aware of it. You didn't just find it out today, correct?
No, I've read about it in the papers, okay?
So, Mr. Oliver, when you read that Mr. Durst had admitted to dismembering Morris Black, did that cause you to question, to say to yourself, wow, I wonder if I know this man?
I thought it was unbelievable. It really was.
All right. You would agree, Mr. Oliver, that your goal in this case, rather than being a neutral and unbiased witness, has been to protect your friend Bob Durst in any way you can, correct?
No.
That's what that
Overruled.
assumes he has a goal.
You know, everything assumes something else, and I think that's a fair assumption that people have goals. Maybe not. I think it's a fair question. He can deny it, Mr. DeGuerin. It's fine. It's overruled.
Mr. Oliver, isn't it true that the reason you have claimed memory issues is because you want to protect Bob Durst?
I have not claimed memory issues.
Mr. Oliver, isn't it also true that the reason that you have constantly said you don't understand my questions is because you, again, don't want to say anything that's going to inculpate Mr. Durst?
No, I'm trying to answer correctly, and I'm finding it very difficult to understand your questions.
October 30th, 2019, clip D0038, page 91, line 8 to page 92, line 5. By the way, Your Honor, I'm almost finished.
Improper impeachment.
This is my last clip.
So there's an objection of improper impeachment. I do not have the document in front of me that you're referring to. What you're impeaching.
Under 1235.
I get the theory. I just don't know the text that you're using, if it is indeed inconsistent with the previous answer.
It's inconsistent with the previous answer and numerous other answers that he's given. And there's no requirement that the impeachment occur after the question.
No, but it must be inconsistent. Are you telling me it's not?
It is inconsistent. Absolutely. It is
Mr.
inconsistent.
I don't, at this point, I don't have any idea what he's going to play.
I just gave
But
it
he- but he-
citation.
Look at it. You look at it and tell me if it's inconsistent.
Page, this is going to be from the 10/30/19 interview, page 91, line 8 to page 92, line 5. As I said, Your Honor, this is
No,
my...
no, I don't need to hear anymore.
No, I'm just telling the court.
I understand the rationale.
No, I'm just telling the court, this is my last clip, if the court is...
Well, the last clip is not an exception.
No, I'm just letting the court know for the purposes of 352, et cetera, this is my last clip.
Yeah, I'm
That
happy.
would figure into a 352 analysis.
No, I'm happy about that, but I want to know if it's inconsistent. Otherwise, you already asked your last one and you played your last clip already. So let's see.
Line 91, page I mean, page 91, line what to what?
Line 8 to page 92, line 5. You know what? Do you want to look at it in mine?
No, I've got it right here.
Okay.
Thank you.
It starts with "so I assume."
No, that's not it. Here's the real thing.
Well, no, Mr.
No,
DeGuerin.
those are your notes. I don't need your notes. Thank you. In fact, I don't want your notes.
Okay, Mr. DeGuerin.
I want the actual transcript.
I love this friendly dialogue we always have.
Yeah.
You know, I think the easiest thing to do would be to approach. The problem is, depending on how it's printed, et cetera, the pages will be different. So may I approach the court? I'll show the court what the clip is.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I have it, if you can, okay.
Extends here. Your Honor. I assume. This is him right here. Hey, back up. No, yeah, this is me. Yeah, he said what's over, Your Honor? He's being. What's that? Your Honor. Mr. Oliver, did you discuss the October 30th, 2019 interview that you had with me with Mr. Durst's attorneys?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Did you discuss the October 30th, 2019 interview that you had with me with Mr. Durst's attorneys afterwards?
I don't think so.
Do you recall being asked if you were going to discuss the interview with Mr. Durst's lawyers and responding that you were not sure if you intended to do so?
I don't recall.
Would that be consistent, as much as you can remember, with what your state of mind was at the time?
I can't answer that question. I don't understand it. My state of mind, consistent with what?
Do you, Mr. Oliver, if Mr. Durst, if he had confessed to you that he had killed either Susan or Kathy, would you tell us?
Tell who?
Would you testify in court if Bob Durst had confessed to you? Would you tell us?
That's a hypothetical, not based on any.
I don't know. I guess if I was asked,
Didn't you, in fact, weren't you asked that question October 30th, 2019, and didn't you respond you were not sure what you would have done if Mr. Durst had confessed to you?
if that's what I said, then that's what I said.
Well, let me ask you, does that reflect your current views?
I mean, what's the question, sir?
Mr. Oliver, if Bob Durst had confessed to you that he had killed Susan Berman, would you admit that on the stand today?
Of course.
If he had confessed to you that he had killed Kathy Durst, would you admit it on the stand today?
Yes.
Then why is it, Mr. Oliver, that you were so angry with Nick Chavin for having volunteered that exact information when he was asked?
I think I was just trying to be supportive of Bob, that's all.
You were trying to be supportive of Bob by telling him that Nick Chavin had betrayed him, that you couldn't understand why Nick Chavin didn't just keep his mouth shut? Is that what you characterize as being supportive of Mr. Durst?
I'd ask for the optional completeness of that statement, Your Honor.
That's not an
He goes on
objection.
to say that he believes Nick Chavin was lying.
Overruled.
And almost the next breath.
Mr. DeGuerin, you can go into that. So, overruled.
Can the question be read back, Your Honor, please?
Yes, please. Please read it back.
Question, you were trying to be supportive of Bob by telling him that Nick Chavin had betrayed him, but you couldn't understand why Nick Chavin couldn't keep his mouth shut. Is that what you would characterize?
I guess so.
No further questions.
Mr. DeGuerin, you may question the witness.
May I see if we've got the clip that I want to play, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would just request that when Mr. DeGuerin wants to take Mr. Oliver on as his own witness, as he has indicated to me before he wants to do, that he let court and counsel know that at this point in time he's taking him on as his own witness, as that will change the dynamic of questioning.
I have a right to cross-examine.
That's not what I...
You don't, actually.
Well,
Then
then,
talk about it.
I don't have a right to cross-examine a witness?
You have the right to examine the witness, but you may not need. The witness is associated with, it's in the evidence. You probably know the section. It's in the
I
evidence.
need a moment to get this clip.
Yep.
Your Honor, the people...
I can't hear.
Your Honor,
What,
the people previously filed a motion on this issue. Does the court want me to give the court the date of that motion regarding the defense not being allowed to ask leading questions?
Well, I know the law. I just don't remember the section.
Oh, Mr. Balian was asking. It's actually, I believe it's case authority, Your Honor, rather than
No,
section.
it's in the evidence. It's in the code. It's in the code. Which one?
767.
767. Hold on. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That's Wigmore, 773, 1940 edition. So that's the interpretation of, that's the authority on leading questions on a party by a party, of a person associated with a party. So 767 is the basis. Hardly ever get to look at Wigmore these days. All right, go ahead.
Your Honor, we would also, just the record's clear, cite People versus Gray, Grey, 1972, 23 Cal 3rd, 456 at 459.
No, thank you. I'm comfortable with the rule. I'm comfortable.
Okay.
It's fine. It's not really even controversial.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
You may proceed, Mr. DeGuerin.
In the same conversation Mr. Lewin just asked you about, did you tell Mr. Lewin that Nick Chavin was a liar? In your opinion?
I think I did, yes.
Did you say that you didn't think Nick Chavin was truthful?
Your Honor.
Nope. Overruled.
Did you say that you tell Mr. Lewin in the same conversation that he just referred to that you didn't think that Nick Chavin was truthful?
Yes.
May we play the clip that I have, Your Honor, from page 93?
No,
Line
he
2.
he just established your point. He established your point. So no, you're not.
We suggest that Mr. DeGuerin give the date of the interviews. We're talking about so many interviews. Just give the date of the interview so we know.
Okay, appreciate
what you're
that.
referring to.
Sure.
Thank you, Your Honor.
October 30th, 2019.
Thank you.
I asked to play.
No, you can't play it. Here's the thing. If you can confront a witness with his inconsistent statement, he just agreed with you. It's established.
This is rehabilitation, Your Honor.
I get it. He agrees. You're not really.
It's a prior consistent statement.
It would not be a prior consistent statement because the motive to fabricate predates. It's improper procedure Mr. DeGuerin is trying to use, if the court is indicating.
I don't think it's a prior consistent statement. He's acknowledged a statement. There's nothing to confront him with. You're not. You may not play a tape at this juncture.
In fact, did you say several times that you couldn't believe what Nick said?
Yes,
Meaning that you couldn't believe Nick because he's not credible?
yes,
You know Nick Chavin, or knew Nick Chavin, didn't you?
yes.
Do you have an opinion about whether he's a truthful person?
I thought he had a tendency to exaggerate things.
In fact, have you told Mr. Lewin and told others that you thought Nick was hanging around Bob just for the money?
I did say that.
You know, these were a series of leading questions. The court had said, I haven't objected yet, but.
Fine.
Court-
Thank you.
That's one of those speaking non-objections.
Yeah. I mean, what do I do? It's not a speaking objection. No. Thank you.
Okay, let me dispense of this right as soon as we can. This white slavery, whether it was, the comment was suggested by Becerra or whether it came from you, were you being sarcastic?
I apologize, but could you repeat that exactly?
Yeah, Mr. Lewin started off today with talking about a purported statement. It's not recorded. It's in a report by Detective Becerra dated 20 years ago. Was any remark about white slavery by you meant as sarcasm?
I don't remember even saying that.
And by the way, about that, you've had a chance to review a 3-page typewritten report by this Detective Becerra, have you?
Yes, I have.
And that report was made 20 years ago, correct?
Correct.
Is it true that memory is such that you sometimes recall or confuse what you recall of your own knowledge with what you've read or heard about the case?
Sustained.
Well, state whether or not that's a common thing that happens, that you sometimes get confused about what you've heard or what you know.
Sustained.
I'm sorry.
Sustain the objection. Sustained. Don't answer that question. Please wait for the next question.
Mr. Lewin asked you about Susan Berman and a conversation that Susan Berman had that she was being Bob's spokesperson in the weeks following Kathy's disappearance. You recall that discussion with Mr. Lewin?
Yes.
I believe you said that she had said that Bob was very upset and would be able to talk to you after things calmed down a bit.
Meaning?
Did you say that?
Sustained.
What did you say?
What did I say?
Yeah,
Hey,
about Bob being upset or
Wait.
her telling you that Bob was upset.
what did Susan Berman purportedly say to me? Is that what you're
Right,
asking?
right.
Okay.
As best you recall.
As I recall, the gist of the conversation was, I think she said to me, refresh my memory of this, I think she said to me, Bob knows you're trying to reach him, he's very upset, and he'll be in touch with you when things calm down and to talk to you. He'll get in touch with you. Something to that effect.
You learned, I believe you testified that you learned about Kathy's being missing from reading the Post.
Yeah, yes.
So the jurors can understand the Post as opposed, that is the New York Post, as opposed to something like the New York Times. How would you compare those two?
Well, the Post is a scandal rag, you know, it's a sensational paper.
Does it have these kind of blaring headlines that capture people's attention on the newsstands?
Yeah, it sells sensation.
In fact, they still have newsstands in New York City, don't they?
Yes, we still do.
Where people on the street can walk by and they catch their eye with some catchy headline or picture or something like that.
Yes, there's still newsstands in New York.
And in 1982, we're now talking about 39 years ago, what was the situation with the publicity, the news, and so forth, once the news story broke that the daughter-in-law of Seymour Durst, the powerful real estate magnate, was missing? What was the situation then?
Oh, it was like all-consuming in the New York Post and the Daily News, and it was, it was a good story for them.
Mr. Lewin asked you some questions about, well, had this ever happened to you before? Were these very strange circumstances at the time?
Yes, very strange.
Bob was your friend,
Yes.
and tell the jury how you felt about talking to him about these strange circumstances.
Being at the time.
Overall,
Should I answer?
yeah, you can answer.
How I felt? I mean, Bob didn't want to talk about it, and it was upsetting, so I respected his need to internalize his own, grief about it. I mean, I just respected his wishes, that's all.
You did talk to him a bit, didn't you?
About her missing?
Yes, and about what he and his family were doing to try to
Yes,
find her?
we had one conversation.
And what was that conversation?
Objection, your side.
It's been gone into, it's been inquired about.
Sustained.
I'm sorry?
Sustained.
Well, were you aware of the reports of sightings of Kathy in
Yes.
Manhattan?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence. Also, the court's prior ruling,
Sustained.
Your Honor.
Sustained.
What were you aware of?
That's going to call for hearsay, potentially. The question's vague. Also irrelevant.
Okay.
Sustained.
In describing the circumstances that existed in 1982 after the news came out that Seymour Durst's daughter-in-law, Bob's wife, was missing, what were the circumstances?
Vague.
Sustained.
Well,
Go ahead.
Don't answer.
Mr. Lewin asked you about your conversation with Bob, and in that conversation with Bob, did he tell you about what had been going on, what the sightings had been, what the
Objection, hearsay.
investigations had been, how many detectives were on it, for instance?
Objection, hearsay.
I'm going to take a moment to rule on this objection. So I'm going to let people go to their lunch. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to resume at 1:30. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll resume at 1:30. Thank you. Erica will take that. All right, the jurors have left, and let me just describe the scenario here. We have some very broad questions that essentially invite the witness to make statements that would, to talk about things that I've excluded as hearsay. And I think so I need to be careful here about what is relevant and what is not. Now, it seems to me the current thrust of the questioning is more about the questions, more about the conversations between Mr. Durst and this witness, Mr. Oliver. So the conversations have been exposed to some degree to show the witnesses, and I'm asking him to wait here just for a moment, just because I want him to understand what I'm going to exclude in order of not to volunteer.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So, but first is the question of relevance and whether there is a new non-hearsay purpose for these statements. So he's made statements that show a bias or association, just bias because of his relationship with Mr. Durst, questions he didn't ask that someone else might have asked, and I left that in for his credibility. So does it reflect on his credibility that Mr. Durst also told him these things, these circumstances, if indeed that's the answer?
Number one, he's already said that Mr. Durst did not discuss with him any of these issues. So what we would have to have is Mr. Oliver coming back. That means he either perjured himself before or he'll be perjuring himself now. My concern is this is no more than a sneaky attempt. No, sneaky would be the word I would use, by the defense to attempt to get in more elevator operator building people evidence that they have been told 25 times isn't coming in. So I don't know what Mr. Oliver is going to say, but this witness has lied. He's perjured himself up there on the stand. He continues to do so, and I wouldn't put anything past whatever he's going to say. So
Well,
I'm very concerned. I don't
Well,
know.
I'm concerned about him not violating, doing an end run here around evidence that is hearsay that's not reliable. And so these vague questions about what was it like in New York at the time, I need that's pretty open-ended and dangerous for that reason. So let me understand where you're going, Mr. DeGuerin. Let me just instruct you. I don't know what you may have heard, Mr. Oliver. I suspect you've heard the whole story of, in fact, you even referenced it earlier about supposed reports of Kathy Durst being seen alive after she almost certainly was not. So she's gone, yet she's reported by people who are not here to be cross-examined. It's hearsay, so I've not allowed it. So I think I'm prepared to instruct him now, Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chestnut, that he should not volunteer anything of that sort, and that I will order him not to. If for some reason your question implicates that answer, that you not answer and have a timeout. You got your lawyer over here. She also is sensitive to what's going on, I think. So that's my order, that you not talk about statements people made at the time claiming to have cited this missing person. So now a question may rightly call for it. So that's why I'm allowing the timeout.
So, we would ask, number one, it's my understanding from Mr. Oliver's prior testimony and his statements that Bob Durst never discussed this issue with him. So in other words, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to get in where Mr. Oliver can comment on something he might have read, which he wasn't even recipient to, which the court has said either way doesn't come in.
Okay, I don't think we need Mr. Oliver any longer. We can excuse him now?
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yes, correct.
I've made the order, right?
Right.
No.
So, any objection to that order?
Well, yes, there's an objection
Let
to
me
the
hear it.
order, and the objection is the prosecution has gone into the conversation that Mr. Oliver had with Bob Durst after his wife
Okay.
disappeared, and it's
I don't
in
need
the
him here for
transcripts.
that. I don't need him here for that. I'm going to excuse you, Mr. Oliver, your counsel, you're excused, and we'll discuss whether that is a hearsay exception, in which case.
Am I excused for the day?
You're ordered to return at 1:30. Do not discuss your testimony with any other witness in this case.
I just want to sure.
All right, so Mr. Oliver is left, and the question, now it is our lunch break, and I do want our people to, our staff to be able to leave promptly, but, so let me hear your argument about what his talks with Mr. Durst about, number one, Nick Chavin, or number two, that you didn't ask him about, for instance, you didn't ask him whether or not he had done it. That seems to be as close as you can come to suggesting a reason for a hearsay exception.
Well, Mr. Lewin went into the conversations that he had with Mr. Durst following Kathy's disappearance after it had hit the news and he found out about it. I think we have a right to go into that also, and what was said to him, what he believed, and why he remained as reluctant to ask specific questions about it. Mr. Lewin has asked questions like, well, is there any other person in your life that has disappeared, and wouldn't you ask questions of your friend about this? And I want to show the circumstances that existed in New York at the time, the terrible publicity that was going on all the time, the trauma that the Durst family and Mr. Durst were going through with their name being dragged through the tabloid news all during that period of time, and that's where I want to go.
So
with it.
the sympathy for Mr.
Prosecution has introduced evidence about that. I believe we have a right to go into it also.
So you're trying to establish, as I understand it, that sympathy for Mr. Durst is justifiable, and he should not be held he should not be, his credibility shouldn't suffer because there is a reason to be on Mr. Durst's side, I guess. Yes, Mr.
Well,
Chestnut?
also that, yes, of course, their friendship, but that's been established.
Yes?
But, Your Honor,
Yes?
Mr. Lewin has questioned why this witness did not inquire further. Another inference as to why is based on the fact that his friend believes his wife is missing, has disappeared, not been murdered. This man had information leading him to believe that she disappeared, and it is not unfair for the jury, it's eminently fair for the jury to hear that the reason this man would not start talking to his friend about suspicions because of the fact that he understood Mr. Durst believed she had disappeared, and he at the time believed that she disappeared. That's the problem, and Mr. Lewin has tried to suggest that the reason he's not talking to Mr. Durst is because he's afraid of the answer. But we're allowed to raise the fact that this man had a legitimate reason for not wanting to bother someone who would be in distress if his wife is missing.
This is true, but do you expect him to say that anything about this hearsay?
Well, Your Honor, not for the truth of it.
No, that's not my question to you. My question is...
Yes, I would, Your Honor,
Okay.
but if the court were not to approve it, there has to be something structured that allows him to say that there were circumstances that he was aware of that led him to believe she had disappeared, and he did not want to talk or bother his friend at the time of that kind of stress and concern.
So, okay, I understand that. So, Mr. Lewin, why not? If you've given this, you didn't need to impeach this witness as much as you did and in the way you did, but you chose to, and you chose to go even farther than go into his inconsistent statements. You dug pretty deep there, and you dug into this area that there seems to be no explanation for why he would act the way he did. Now, you say he'll be committing perjury, maybe. He might.
Well, let me address...
I don't want to encourage perjury, but on the other hand, as an evidentiary matter, I don't know what's perjury and what it's not.
Well, let me address what the court said. Number one, Mr. Oliver has been questioned repeatedly. He has said that he did not have any conversations with Mr. Durst, specifically at all, about what happened. So in other words, it can't come from Mr. Durst. So what they're really trying to do is, they now want to say, even though Mr. Oliver has said he did not pay attention, he wasn't reading it, he did not know the details, they now want to try, for the 25th time, to bring in inadmissible hearsay evidence before the jury involving the building employees, etc. And they want to get it in, not even that Mr. Durst told Doug Oliver that information,
They can't.
because he's already said that they never talked about it, but the relevance is apparently they want to say that Mr. Oliver read about it or knew about it, which Mr. Oliver has already testified that he did not, that he was not following anything, and that is the reason that he did not say anything to Mr. Durst, which, by the way, under 352, I asked him 12 different times, and he never said that. So the problem, Your Honor, is in the end, they are trying to open their own door. My impeachment had nothing to do with that. There were numerous areas of impeachment that I did not go into. If that's what it's going to be, then, Your Honor,
you went into this one, Mr. Balian. Maybe you've got a little perspective here because you weren't asking those questions,
Right.
and you're watching them being asked.
Yes, and Mr. Lewin asked the witness a very direct question, not a leading question at all. Why didn't you raise that issue? He asked him directly. Like, the witness could have said whatever he wanted. He asked him why. That's a question from a prosecution's point of view, you're asking an open-ended question. They can answer whatever they want. What's the truth? Why didn't you?
Okay.
He didn't say it was because of elevator operators.
All right, and Mr. Chesnoff?
Yes, what I don't understand is this, Your Honor. What did he think we were going to ask him about that he felt he had to do the kind of impeachment that he did if it wasn't about his state of mind at the time, specifically if he was going to go into conversations that he had with Mr. Durst about the facts of the case? He obviously anticipated that we were going to do something with this witness, and the something was to raise those things that led him to have the state of mind he had. Otherwise, this is all, the whole thing shouldn't have happened.
So you've suggested that he be allowed to say he was, that there's a different way to structure it so that he...
That was my alternative, Your Honor, because I'm hopeful that you'll allow it to be the way we want, but if you don't, then with his lawyer, perhaps with your help and Mr. Lewin's help, we can structure a response that covers the fact that he had, at least in his mind, the belief that she had actually disappeared.
So, Your Honor,
I'm not inclined to allow any of the specifics, but...
Your Honor, if he wants to testify, we don't have any problem. If Mr. Oliver wants to testify, we believe it's perjury, and I'll hit him up.
Well, maybe we should give him the Fifth Amendment.
Maybe you should, and I'll hit him
No,
up
not
on
me.
and I'll hit him up on cross, but the redirect, recross, whatever you want to call it. But the issue is, if he wants to get up here and say, "Listen, I did not ask Bob Durst these questions because I believed that she had disappeared, and that I believe Bob believed she had disappeared." That gets to what they want, supposedly, and it doesn't bring in any of this hearsay.
I think that for his own good, he's probably better off sticking to that. All right, we're in recess.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm ruling, before he gives an answer like that, he's going to give a timeout. He's not talking about
Your
it.
Honor, if Mr. Lewin is going to be threatening perjury charges, I think that it's incumbent on the court to give a warning to Mr. Oliver outside the presence of the jury of what his rights are. That's several times
No, I didn't.
Mr. Lewin has used the word perjury.
I don't think I have that obligation.
No.
I expect he's going to testify truthfully. He hasn't committed perjury so far as I know, but he's not been entirely frank either.
Can I add a very brief?
Yeah, we got to give them extra lunch now.
My point earlier was, when he was asked a direct question, he didn't say anything about this elevator operator stuff. He said, "I don't know, I don't have an answer for that." It's not going to be until the defense suggests this to him that they're creating this version.
I noticed that, and so, I mean, you pointed it out, and I recognize that what you're saying is true, so I'll be mindful of that when ruling on any of these other points.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Have a nice lunch, everybody.